Talia adjusted her backpack as she walked across campus. Her spirit weighed down. The crisp autumn air did nothing to shake the heaviness pressing against her. She had always known college would challenge her, but she never expected a battle for her soul. Unlike many of her peers, she honored Yahuwah, keeping his commandments and observing his appointed times, the Moedim. She prayed daily and saw his truth in his word. But the deeper she grew in her faith, the more she felt something fighting against her. And at the center of it all, her theology professor, Dr. Alden. The strange occurrences started slowly. First the dreams, shadows whispering her name, unseen figures mocking her prayers, a suffocating force pressing on her chest. Then the dizziness, sudden waves of exhaustion, especially in Theology 301, Dr. Alden's class. And finally, her grades. Despite her passion for scripture and diligent study, her grades in Dr. Alden's class plummeted. Papers she had researched thoroughly came back with harsh, dismissive comments. Points were deducted for flawed interpretation whenever she used scripture to support the feasts of Yahuwah over Christian traditions. Her friends noticed the changes first. "Talia, what is going on?" Mia asked one evening. "You're barely sleeping, you look drained, and your grades, they don't make any sense." Jonah nodded. "And yeah, let's be real, why is your only bad grade in theology? That's like your strongest subject." Talia hesitated. "It's not just class," she whispered. Something's wrong. I feel like I'm being spiritually attacked." Mia frowned. "You think it's coming from Dr. Alden?" Talia nodded. "Yeah, and I think he's targeting me because I refuse to compromise my faith." The classroom debate was the turning point. Dr. Alden stood at the front of the room, his smirk in place. "Today, we'll be discussing the theological significance of Christian holidays, Easter, Christmas, and their role in the faith." Talia raised her hand. "Actually, I'd like to address the origins of these holidays and why they differ from Yahuwah's appointed feasts." Dr. Alden smiled. Miss James, by all means enlighten us." Talia took a deep breath. "Okay. Christmas isn't in the Bible. Nowhere in Scripture are we commanded to celebrate December 25th as the Messiah's birth. In fact, that date comes from pagan Roman sun worship, Sol Invictus. And Easter, that name itself comes from Ishtar, the fertility goddess. The eggs, the rabbits, it's all rooted in fertility rituals, not the resurrection." Some students murmured, others raised their eyebrows. Dr. Alden chuckled. The pagan origins argument. These holidays have been redeemed for Christian worship." Talia didn't back down. "But Yahuwah never told us to redeem paganism. He gave us his own holy days, Kodesh days, the Moedim, Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, Shavuot. These are the appointed times that Messiah himself honored. Why do we reject what Yahuwah commanded and embrace what he never sanctioned?" Dr. Alden's smirk flickered, a flash of something dark behind his eyes. "Because," he said smoothly, "the early church fathers, under divine inspiration, established these traditions to reflect Christ's work." Talia shook her head. "So we're supposed to trust men's traditions over what Yahuwah commanded?" It's funny because men's traditions in Torah include honoring Pesach. Messiah celebrated Pesach, Passover, not Easter. And he was probably born during Sukkot, not Christmas. If we follow him, why do we ignore what he did? Silence filled the room. Dr. Alden's face tensed, his fingers gripping the podium. "That's enough, Miss James. Let's move on." That night, the dreams intensified. She stood in a candlelit room. The air thickened with the scent of burning herbs. An altar stood before her, and behind it, Dr. Alden. But he wasn't alone. Dark, slithering tendrils of something unholy wrapped around him, whispering in a language that made her skin crawl. On the altar were photographs, faces of students, including hers. Her breath caught in her throat. He was performing rituals over them. Talia tried to step closer, but a force held her back. Dr. Alden's eyes glowed unnaturally. "You should stop fighting," his voice slithered. "You have no idea what you're up against." She woke up, gasping. Mia convinced Talia to visit the school psychologist, Dr. Green. As Talia described her dreams, the dizziness, the unexplained spiritual oppression, Dr. Green listened with an unreadable expression. Then she sighed. Talia, it sounds like you're under a lot of stress. You're very passionate about your beliefs, but sometimes stress can manifest in strange ways. Maybe you're seeing connections that really aren't there. Talia's stomach tightened. This isn't stress. This is spiritual. Dr. Green smiled patronizingly. I think therapy sessions and maybe something mild for anxiety would help. Talia's blood boiled. They want to gaslight her into silence. She stood abruptly. I don't need medication. I need the truth. And she stormed out. The next day, Talia started investigating. Through whispered conversations and late-night research, she discovered something chilling. Dr. Alden had been performing rituals over his students, using their photos as a conduit for energy. His goal? To harness their future, spiritual beliefs, planting seeds of deceit so they would unknowingly pass on generational curses. By getting students to embrace pagan traditions like Christmas and Easter, he was leading them into spiritual bondage. The more they participated, the more their descendants would be trapped in deception. And the force behind it all? A demon called Orith. Ancient texts described Orith as a spirit of deception, one that worked through false teachers to twist truth and keep people enslaved to darkness while thinking they were in the light. And Dr. Alden was his vessel. Talia intensified her prayers. She fasted. She joined a small community of Yahuwah followers who strengthened her faith, and something shifted. Each time she prayed, the attacks weakened, the dizziness faded, the nightmares lost their grip. At the same time, Dr. Alden began to look weaker. His voice faltered in class. His once sharp gaze grew dull. Then the exposure came. A janitor discovered a hidden chamber in his office, filled with candles, ritual objects, and photos of students covered in markings. When the administration investigated, the truth was unraveled. Within days, Dr. Alden resigned. The witchcraft ceased. The nightmares ended. You looked lighter, Jonas said one afternoon, like something lifted off of you. Talia smiled, the weight gone from her shoulder. It did. Yahuwah delivered me. Mia squeezed her hand. I don't know what you've been through, but I believe you now. Talia stood victorious, not by her own strength, but by the power of Yahuwah. Her faith had been tested, but now it was unshakable.